folks, thanks for joining me. Nick Cortez here from Creation Army TV, and today we're going to be talking about part 2 of my pen tool series. We're going to be talking about slightly more advanced features and uses for the pen tool. So I'm using Illustrator CC, but you can use any version of Illustrator for this lesson if you want to follow along. So the task at hand is tracing a piece of artwork. This is something that a graphic designer finds himself doing pretty often. You might sketch something in your notebook, you might sketch something on a piece of paper, and you might have to scan or take a picture of it with your phone, put it here in Illustrator, and then start tracing away with your pen tool. Today's example is just going to use art from Shutterstock. I encourage people to pull art from Shutterstock for tracing if you want to learn, but if you're making your own original artwork and logos, please use your own sketches and don't steal from other artists. So in we go. I'm in Illustrator and I've already got the image here. How did I get this image? How am I going to trace it? Let's hop over to Chrome and go on the internet. I've already searched for fish on Shutterstock. Shutterstock contains lots of great stock images. We've got fish and chips here, and we've also got some vector artwork from some other great artists, and you can see that there's a nice watermark and everything, so please be aware of that. I just pulled this image, if I mouse over it here, from Shutterstock. It's a nice fish logo. You could probably buy it and then put your client's, Joe's Fish and Chips over the top, and you'd have a logo. But if you drew this yourself and you want to convert it to vector, you want to trace it with the pen tool, here's what you can do. I'm going to mouse over this, and I'm in a Mac, so I'm going to do a targeted screenshot by hitting Command Control Shift 4, and I'll just draw a box around this, and then now that is on the clipboard. So I can come over to Illustrator. I've made a layer here in the top left. It says pick. I always make a layer where I put source images, and I'll paste the image on. So the image is here. It's not quite centered on my artboard. You can move it anywhere you want to, but I'm going to use the align palette, make sure things are aligning to artboard, and I'll just put it in the center vertically and horizontally, and then I'll just kind of pull from the center here. I'm holding Option and Shift, and it's growing proportionally and out from the center, so it's nice and large. And what I like to do when I trace images is I like to screen my image back in opacity. You can do that here with the transparency palette. Screen it back to maybe 50%, so we'll be able to basically see through this image down onto our artwork on lower layers. Some people like to put their picture or their source image below their artwork layer and trace in reverse. I like to trace as if you were doing it in the it's actually kind of the reverse of real life, where you would put a piece of tracing paper down, but we're putting our source image on top. I'm going to put it on this picture layer and a lock. So now I can't affect this layer. Let's go to our artwork layer and pull out our handy pen tool. I'm going to hit P on the keyboard, or otherwise your pen tool is right here. And I'll zoom in a couple of times. That's Command plus or Control plus on a PC. And I'll fold up my color palette because I don't need it yet. Alright, so what are some of the principles of tracing your source image with your pen tool? Well, what I like to do, number one, is I like to find a place where there's a sharp point, and I usually like to make that my starting point, rather than somewhere along a line segment, like a curvy area like this. It's usually a better idea to start and end on a point. So I could start at the tip of the fish here on his nose, or the tip of his fin. For today's purpose, we'll start here, right where his body curves around to nothing. And I'm going to zoom in a couple of times so you can see what I'm doing. You'll notice that when I start here, I've got my first anchor point, and what I'm going to do is come around on the outside of the fish here. This segment of line turns into, as we go around, it turns into the outer perimeter of the fish. So I'll start here. All right. What I like to do usually when I'm tracing a scanned image like this is I like to find on the image these perfectly vertical raster lines. These are the the lines of the pixels that make up this bitmap image. So I'll find a perfectly straight area, basically where this curve would be going perfectly up and down in a vertical fashion. So that is usually the place where I like to put my next anchor point, and then of course I'll hit shift so that it snaps, so my pen tool's handlers are now snapped to perfectly vertical. And I'll stretch this probably a little bit more, give it more influence, and then my next area, the next place that I want to lay my next anchor point would be in a similar area. Like, remember just a second ago I was talking about finding a perfectly vertical area. If you can find the next area to be perfectly horizontal, then that would be in your favor. And it looks like this area right here is where this line, this S curve, starts to become almost perfectly horizontal. So this will be the ideal area to lay your next anchor point, and I'll do that right now. And if I hold shift, it snaps to, in other words, Illustrator is constraining the angle of my handler to perfectly horizontal. And you can see that the curve that's left behind, I'm sorry, let me strengthen the stroke here so that we can see the entire line. I'll make it blue, and I'll make it 1.5 in width. You can see that the line now almost perfectly conforms to the image below. And that's what we want to do. If, for example, I'm going to move this out of the way because I want to keep it, work on it later. Not the wrong thing to do, but the hard way of doing things in Illustrator is to click your first anchor point and then say, I want my next anchor point to be here. This is going to be at a weird angle. There's no way for my eye to tell, at what angle this is. I don't know if this is 45. That's obviously wrong. Is it totally horizontal? No, of course not. It's somewhere in the middle. So there's a guessing game here. And I like to take all the guesswork out of laying my Bezier curves with the pen tool. And you can see from the influence of my leading tangent that the line segment that I'm about to lay is fine, but the next one is going to be a little, I don't know, it's not going to be influenced in the right way. This did happen to work out okay, but there are instances when you'll draw one, you come around like this, and the influence might be right on the first line, but then you'll draw the second one, and it's not quite matching up to the fish the way you want it to. So again, what I like to do is focus more on these, where my mouse is, these perfectly vertical and these perfectly horizontal areas. These are the easiest areas to lay your anchor points so that your line segments, I'll just continue this line, so that your line segments land where you want them to land. In other words, you're controlling them. You're not letting Illustrator control them. So I will hold shift and I'll pull the tangent here pretty far out, and my next anchor point is going to be right here at the tip of his nose, and I'll pull the influence down. Okay, so once again, if you watch my first lesson, you know that if I hold option, I can steer this leading tangent individually from the trailing tangent, and I want to go up his nose toward his back. I need a little more room to see the fish, so I'm going to hover near the edge of the window, and you'll see that we kind of travel, it's like using the hand tool, we travel upwards. This is too far, so I'm going to hover near the bottom, and you'll see that we kind of go downward. You see how close I get to the edge? We go back down. It's not an exact science, but it works. And then the same thing over here with the right edge. I just want to recenter my artwork while still controlling my leading tangent. I've never let go of my mouse or my option key during that move. Okay, so now I have my artwork centered here on my screen. I'm ready to go. I'm going to steer this tangent up toward where I want my next anchor point to be, which is right here on the perfectly horizontal area of the top of the fish's head. Right here, I'll lay it, I'll hold shift, and I'll pull this out perfectly vertical. And now, here's what I want to talk about. Now, at this point, you might think that I want to make this small curve and go up the dorsal fin on this fish, and then back down to the fish's body. That's not actually what I like to do. I've found, after years of using the pen tool in Illustrator, I've found that sometimes your client wants you to remove the dorsal fin, or sometimes they want you to move it to a different area or shrink it, and making it an independent piece from the fish's body is a smarter way to go. So what I'm going to do is just continue my line down here as if there's no dorsal fin at all, and I will create one continuous line. Hopefully I'm zooming out here. one continuous line that goes all the way to my next perfectly vertical area here on the artboard. I'll hit P again, go back to pen tool editing mode, and I'll hover over this anchor point. You see the change that occurs right next to my pen tool. That little line segment is telling me that if I click right there, I will be continuing this open line. So I will click on it, but I will hold my click. I'll hold Option now, and I'll pull straight out. And I'm also going to hold Shift. So it's a click, it's an option, and it's a shift. I haven't moved the anchor point. I'm only continuing my line and pulling my influence toward the next anchor point, which is, I'm going to guess and put this tangent here because I want a lot of influence. This is a large distance we're traveling to our next anchor point, so I want a large influence on this leading tangent. And then I'll come down here and I'll lay my next anchor point on the vertical part of this fish's back, and I'll pull straight down, holding Shift. And we have a nice, smooth, continuous line that leads right to the area that we wanted to target. The next area, you guessed it, is down near the bottom on the fish's tail, where the drawing of the fish, the bitmap image of the fish, the pixels become perfectly horizontal again. That's the ideal area to put my next anchor point. So I'll pull a little bit more influence using Alt and Shift, or Option and Shift on a Mac, and I'll just let go of my click. And now my next anchor point is going to be here in the perfectly horizontal area. I'll click, I'll pull the tangent, and then now I'm going to hold Shift so that I have a perfectly constrained horizontal tangent. And then I'll just kind of, maybe pull the leading tangent a little bit farther, and my next anchor point is going to be here. Click and let go. I guessed right on the influence that this needed to have. If I hadn't pulled long enough, it would have looked like that. If I had pulled this tangent a little too far, it would have looked like that. But I got lucky on how far I needed to pull this influence. And check out my first video on tips on how to get that influence pulled, the right distance. There's no hard and fast rule for how far you have to pull these leading tangents to get to your next anchor point. You do kind of have to develop an eye. It takes practice. And usually I pull about half the distance from my current anchor point to my next. So let's continue down to this area here. Oh, sorry. I'm going to hit P on my keyboard, and I'll again click on the final anchor point to continue the line that we've drawn down towards the bottom of the tail. That looks good. I'm going to hold Option. I have not let go of my click, and I want this line to influence my next line segment. I'm pulling it too far here, sorry. I'll pull it to about right here, and I want this anchor point pulled here on the perfectly vertical area of the fish. And I'll use Option and Shift to pull this leading tangent up a little bit, and my next anchor point will be here at the tip of the fish's tail. My next anchor point, if you're following along, you guessed it, is right here in the perfectly horizontal area, the inside of the fish's tail. So I'll click here, I'll hold Shift. Okay, I'm still holding Shift, and I'm going to click Option as well. I'll extend the leading tangent, and my next anchor point is going to bypass all of this curve. It's going to go to the next perfectly vertical area right here. I'll click and I'll hold Shift, and I'll drag straight up. I'm going to pull this influence, this leading tangent, very far up here. And the reason is my next anchor point is going to be way up here at the top of the fish's head. So this line segment is going to be quite long, meaning this influence has to be quite long. So I'll click my next one here, and I'm going to pull using the Shift key as well. I'm going to pull to the left, and then I'm going to hold Option. I'm going to pull this a little bit farther to the left, and my next anchor point is going to land here on his nose. My next anchor point needs to be in this area. Remember, we did this one when we were starting out going around the fish. This is almost perfectly horizontal, so that's where my next anchor point goes. Okay, and let's match it. You can just pull this all over the place until it matches the bottom of the fish's face. All right, and then the next area that I need to go to is going to be right here, where it's perfectly vertical. So I'll hold shift and I'll pull down, and I see a problem already, and we're going to fix it in a second. I'm going to pull this influence back a little bit and just move the tangent up using option, and then I'll close the line segment that we've drawn to make a compound shape. There we go. Now we're finished drawing the outline of the fish. Let's hide our picture layer to see what we've done. So here's our fish line. Now it doesn't look anything special. It doesn't look like a fish yet because we haven't added the eye, the gill, or the fins, but we'll get to that in a second. But what just happened on the final couple line segments of this fish happened a lot, and that's, you put your anchor point down. I think it was here. You put your anchor point down, and this tangent is at an angle instead of being perfectly constrained like all of the other ones that I've been making. Notice how all the other ones make perfectly continuous, nicely curved lines, but in this area right here on the fish, there's a problem area. So this happens, it's very common, and it's important to know how to go back and fix these areas. So if you just use direct select, which is A on your keyboard, you'll be able to click and drag and select individual anchor points. Their tangents will light up just like this, and you'll be able to redirect them. So you can steer them however you want, but notice how this has now created a kink in the line. And that might be a problem. It might look good to you. Maybe you want to, maybe you want your fish's outline to look like that. I personally don't want that right now, so I will just steer this around until I get the correct look. Okay, until I get something smooth. Let's say I'm satisfied with that. Let's show our fish again. Okay, and so we're pretty close. You can see that it's not right here, but you can edit these to your heart's content. You can even add anchor points by, you highlight your object, you hit plus on the keyboard right next to backspace, and you'll see a little plus sign next to your pen tool. That's actually located here. Add anchor point, which is right under the pen tool, and this will let you add anchor points to your heart's content to any line. Once you click directly on the line, you have another anchor point to work with. As if you just drew it as you were drawing the outline of the fish. Conversely, you can use minus and you can delete anchor points from a line, and that really screwed that one up. I'll undo, and I'll just move this anchor point up, and so now we're matching the fish. Now, I mentioned before that I was going to add the dorsal fin, so I'll start a pen tool, and I'll draw the fin, and I'll do the bottom fin, the eye, and the gill, and that should do it. First, before I do any of that, what I want to do is hide the picture. We're working in outline mode, and I was just doing that for demonstration purposes. But what I'm going to do is, instead of drawing this as an outlined fish, I'm going to make it solid blue, like our source image. So you can do that by coming over here to this little symbol. This represents your fill and your stroke. What we have now is a stroke only, no fill. That's what this little symbol means, the square with the X through it. That means null. That means nothing. So what I need to do, having this object selected like it is, I need to hit this little angled arrow, and it will swap my fill and stroke. That's also Shift X on the keyboard. And that will take the blue stroke color that was just on the fish, and it makes it the fill, and it makes the stroke color null. So now we've got our lovely blue fish. You can make it any color you want to. All I did to pull that color was eyedropper the color from the fish. So now I'm going to re-show my picture layer, and I'm going to do the dorsal fin in the same style as this. I'll hit P on the keyboard, and I'll start drawing a straight line this way, and then my next line will just be a pulled curve like this. I'll hit Option on the keyboard. I'm holding Option, and I'll steer this tangent up this way, and I'll just close my curve. I like to close my curves. You don't have to close your curves, but I like to for more precise control. So now we have our dorsal fin up here, which is fully scalable and independent from the fish. I'll undo a few times. Okay, and I can even change the color of it if I need to. So it doesn't have to be completely joined to the fish. And I'll be doing a video series in a few weeks about the Pathfinder and Illustrator's ability to take two independent shapes and join them into one. If you need to do that for some reason, Illustrator can do that for you. Let's do the bottom of the bottom fin. I'll draw a pen tool line like this because I see a certain S-curve value in this fin. I'll pull it about this far, and then I will put my next anchor point at the tip of the fin, and I'll pull out this way, and then I'll hold Option, re-steer the tangent, and I'll come right back into the fish, and then I'll just close it by clicking the first anchor point. So now I have my bottom fin on my fish. And of course, I don't need to use the pen tool for the eye. What I want to use is the classic ellipse tool, which is L on the keyboard. I'll click here, and of course, if you click and drag, you'll make a circle, and that is in the wrong place. But if I want to make a circle directly right here where my cursor is, in other words, out from the center, I'll hold Option, and I'll click and drag. And if you hold Shift, you'll have a perfect circle. So a perfect circle out from the center is Option Shift while you're making an ellipse. Okay. The next and last piece of the puzzle here is the gill shape. You can do it with the pen tool. You can also do it using two ellipses, one that cuts into the other one. Again, we'll get into that some other time. But for now, I'll just start at one of the tips. I'll pull a long influence, and I will draw and trace this gill shape. I'm holding Option, and I'm going to pull this tangent over this way and steer my line. Before I close the shape, in other words, I'm holding Option so that when I click it, I have the option to independently re-steer the tangent. And I don't really have to. I'm actually going to re-steer this one down a little bit. So there we go. Now we have an almost perfectly drawn fish. Now if you drew this in your sketchbook, or on a bar napkin, or your art director handed you a storyboard with a fish character, and you needed to trace it, now you know how to quickly get around a simple one-color piece of art using your pen tool. And remember that you can get around pretty complex artwork, even more complex than this fish, using just one instance of the pen tool. You can get around some pretty complex areas. It takes a lot of clicking. It takes a lot of shortcut keys, options, shifts, that kind of thing. But the pen tool can get around some very complex areas in one swoop. So there you go. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching. My next tutorial after this is going to be more about the pen tool and how to draw slightly more complex pieces of artwork to create more complex characters. Thanks for watching.